All right, Zach, I know you've got another episode of the QCast to get to, so let's get this recorded.
Let's get this done. Welcome to Regional Ranking Week 3 here on the D3 Datacast. Matt, each week of regional rankings gets a little more important, and that's certainly the case with Week 3, because with the regional rankings for Week 3, we are into once ranked, always ranked time, which means any team that is ranked in Week 3, whether they fall out in the final Week 4 rankings or not, they will count in that magical results versus regionally ranked opponents category. This is big time.
This is big. Yeah, you really want to get teams you've played ranked this week. If not this week, then next week, really get those results. It's almost like we just need a different process. That results versus regionally ranked opponents lagging a week is kind of like, not always the greatest thing. But that's what we have. We'll run through it. We're going to do another weeks of regional ranking predictions here. We're also going to talk about the bubble watch, the bubble picture. Are you ready to go through this week's episode, Zach?
I am, yes. As you said, we'll go through our regional ranking predictions for Week 3 and mix in some bubble talk along the way. But first, Matt, you have a ballot due for your top 25 this week. Take us through the hot and fresh ballot.
Yes, I have not submitted this ballot yet. So Zach, if you want to correct me on anything, if we want to reconsider anything here, I still have time to make a change. But this is the ballot I have run through on Sunday afternoon, recording this on a Sunday, releasing it on a Monday. I'm just going to kind of read through the order for the podcast. I don't want to forget the Spotify folks out there, Zach, who can't see the screen. So I'm going to just read through quickly my top 25 ballot for the week. Starting off at number 1, Hampton, Sydney. 2, Randolph-Macon. Then rounding out the top 5 is Trinity, Connecticut, John Carroll, and Cal Lutheran. Coming in at number 6 is Trinity, Texas. Then Guilford, Oswego State, Calvin, and Keene State at 10. Then Widener, 11, NYU, Case Western Reserve, Trine, UW-Platteville at 15. Nebraska Wesleyan, Catholic, DeSales, and Dubuque at 20. 21 is Mount Union, Illinois Wesleyan, Elmhurst, Johns Hopkins, and then finishing up my top 25 is Tufts at number 25.
Now, Matt, I got an early access preview of your top 25, and so I picked out a few things that I thought might be interesting to talk about. Let's start with, Matt, our Kelvin Knights picked up a huge win over Trine, and I noticed looking back at your ballot from last week, Kelvin and Trine just about switched spots, but there's something else I was wondering about here, and if Kelvin's win over Trine also broke a little bit of a triangle for you between Trine, Platteville, and Calvin, just based on the way that your previous ballots had worked, and towards the end of the non-conference season, Trine had a win over Platteville in Angola. Calvin played Platteville on a neutral court there in Angola and lost. So and then with Trine beating Calvin in the first meeting, it felt like in terms of your top 25 ordering, you kind of were forced into like a Trine, Platteville, Calvin order. And now that Calvin's got a win over Trine to even up the season series, you could do whatever you want between those two. And then also with Calvin beating Trine, who had beaten Platteville, that kind of frees maybe a little bit of Calvin from being blocked by Platteville based on that head-to-head. Is that a way that you thought about it when you were putting together this ballot, or does that just happen to be the way it worked out and I'm reading too much into maybe the ordering of those three teams?
I think for this week, maybe we're reading a little bit too much into it. That triangle is something I have been cognizant of just because we saw these teams play each other. Trine had a win over Platteville, who beat Calvin. This point in the season, though, any individual win, I would weigh a head-to-head just as far as like how do I think these two teams stack up against each other. But we also have 24 other results for each of these teams, and each of those will also inform my decision as well. So at this point in the season, I'm not really going to peg a team next to each other. If one beats two, and that doesn't mean two has to stay behind them because we have so many more results. So I think at this time, most of a team's season has been locked in. So results of this week, in and of themselves might not sway me too much on a team. And also I might be unshackled from a result that happened in November and December, just from the nature of the season. For Calvin shooting up maybe a few spots higher in my ballot, I think that's a little bit of recognition for me in how they've played, particularly in the second half of conference play versus how they were playing in the first half of conference play. I always think of my ballot, and I try to think of this as not just who beat who, who's rewarded for what, who won, who lost, but really, especially now getting toward the end of the season, who would I expect to win on a neutral court between any kind of teams in a similar rank on the ballot next to each other? Would that be a close neutral court game? Who would think would win? And right now, especially Calvin and Shrine, look, these two teams are very close. We just saw an overtime game at Shrine. I think Calvin, at least with them, matches up a little bit better and is a little bit of a favorite in my mind. That being said, 9 and 14 is not a big gap on my ballot, so these two teams are still very, very close, I think.
And speaking of very, very close, Matt, last week you had Nebraska Wesleyan and Co., two American Rivers Conference members, paired together. This week they're still paired, but they moved up 3 spots. But so I thought that was interesting that they stay paired, moving up the 3 spots. We've talked about how crazy the ARC race is, how little separation there is, and I don't know. I just thought it was a little bit amusing to see them stay paired, even with the change in their ranking overall.
Yeah, it's really hard for me and the ARC overall. They're all good teams, but I'm not sure how great. Like, it's hard for me to take these teams into the top 15 really for what I'm seeing right now. But I also have like 4 of them, I guess, kind of in my top 35. So they're all pretty close. I don't have a lot of separation. And I felt like for a while I kind of wanted to keep Nebraska Wesleyan and Co. somewhat close to each other. I don't think I necessarily had to keep them back to back, but I wanted to keep them kind of close. And I also, Dubuque is maybe like third fiddle in that group right now, or third and fourth with Laura somewhere. I kind of felt like I was bringing Dubuque in this week. I had a lot of carnage in the back half of my ballot. And again, like one loss, depending on who you play this week, might not move you a whole lot in my mind, because we're kind of locked in to some degree. I do have these 10, 15 other teams on my watch list I felt like, and Dubuque was one of those teams, just where some teams moved down, or maybe moved out. I felt like I was needing to move some teams in. So another American Rivers team moved in for me, Dubuque, kind of all the way in at 20. But as I was saying, like for me, 15 to 25, that's almost even on my ballot, I guess.
Yeah, you mentioned Dubuque. That's another one I noticed moving in at number 20. I think that was the highest a team that wasn't ranked on your ballot last week moved in. I also want to ask about Rowan. You had them 17th last week to completely out this week. You talked about the carnage at the back end. And we've talked all season long about those final 5, whatever it is, spots. I was a little bit surprised that you took a team that was 17th last week to move them all the way out. It seemed like maybe at 17 they were a little bit above kind of that cut line or that fringe line where we've seen like a lot of churn throughout the year. Just comment on Rowan.
Yeah, again, 17 to just off my ballot is not very far to move. One of the things for Rowan is they've played, I think, a really good schedule. That conference is tough. They lost a game this week, I think double overtime to Montclair State. So, it's not terrible, but it's not great. I think maybe a team like Rowan should win. My issue with Rowan is they've just sometimes tended to lose some of those games, lose maybe too many games. And I felt like maybe was I just keeping them too high for playing a lot of teams tough that they're not necessarily beating all the time. And a team in my top 25 right now, I wanted to be a little bit more consistent than Rowan. They didn't fall too far. I considered them, at 23, 24, 25. But for me right now, they're just off. And I would vote them in the future if they have a good NJAC tournament.
All right, Matt, 2 more teams I wanted to ask about.
Okay.
Johns Hopkins and Tufts are new into your ballot this week. I think if someone looked at, okay, what did Johns Hopkins do last week? Or what did Tufts do last week? They would probably have a hard time understanding why you're moving him in. But you've talked a few times that at this point, with so many games played, looking more at just the season, are you looking more at the season as a whole, and this is more of like a season achievement type recognition as opposed to more like the week to week adjustment? Because Johns Hopkins took a loss this week, Tufts took a loss this week, and I just think it's a little bit different than maybe how other teams have moved in and out of the ballot.
Yeah, I think if I'm correct, if I have my notes correct, Tufts' loss was a week ago, and I think they were 1-0 this week.
Okay.
At least that's what I have. Johns Hopkins did take a loss to Swarthmore, but I do try not to do too much of the I'm just reacting to the week and a team goes down because they lost. For Johns Hopkins, it was a 1 point loss at Swarthmore. You know, it's okay. It's not a great loss. Kind of a rivalry game. It was a tight game. They did slide significantly down my ballot. But right now, I'm still really trying to lock in how good do I think each team is, not just a series of kind of punishments or rewards based on just the past week alone.
We're definitely at that point in the season where you start looking at the overall body of work, so to speak. All right, excellent, Matt. I think we'll get this top 25 poll, one more after conference tournament play, one heading into the national tournament, and then we'll get just one final one at the conclusion of the tournament. So nothing, in between weekends there. So we're coming down to the wire here in terms of top 25 polls.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, from top 25 ranking, Matt, to regional ranking. Let's get right in because, as we said, we're going to do this as a mix of our regional ranking predictions and preview, and then also trying along the way to bring in some bubble talk, maybe talk about where we think that bubble line is, and some teams where they're standing as of today. All right, so let's start, Matt, with Region 1. I know we did some crazy stuff for that first set and started with Region 10, but we're going to stick with the Region 1 through 10 order here. Matt, we see Trinity, Connecticut holding on to that top spot, followed by Tufts, Williams. And then we get into an interesting trio we talked about a week ago that, we saw could come out anyway. And I think we're in that similar position, but we currently see St. Joseph, Connecticut taking that fourth spot, followed by Albertus Magnus. And then Conn College, who was eliminated this weekend in NESCAC tournament play. So their regular season is over. And then Morrisville State also lost in their conference tournament. But as it stands right now, they still look like the only reasonable pick for that final spot to round out the Region 1 rankings.
Yeah, so this ends up being the same 7 teams we saw last week. I don't think there's going to be any discussion about a different 7 or anyone else. I think this is the 7. This is the same order we predicted last week. What we got wrong was Conn College was slotted up above St. Joseph, and then went St. Joseph, then Albertus. We're going to go with this again. We're going to double down on our approach. Conn College did lose. They took an 0-1. So their resume got a little bit worse. St. Joseph and Albertus, I think, kind of held their resumes or got a little bit better. And we still are trying to roll with that interaction of wins that we saw. St. Joseph beat Albertus, who beat Connecticut College. For us this week, I wouldn't be surprised if somehow they go with the strength of schedule of Connecticut College and the good win of Connecticut College somehow. But we think at some point this order of wins, who's beaten who, kind of needs to hold. So we're going to go with this again for Region 1 and think that Connecticut College maybe slipped down to 6th. But I think 1, 2, and 3 in this region, Trinity, Tufts, and Williams, I think that's pretty solid locked in that they're staying 1, 2, and 3 in that order. And then I think we're going to just kind of take a look at the bubble picture, the tournament picture for each region. I think we feel really, really good about Trinity and Tufts. We feel pretty good about Williams. And then I think St. Joseph we're also feeling pretty well about. And then Albertus is kind of more of a bubble. And I think maybe Connecticut College is maybe more bubble out right now. And Morrisville State, Dunzo, I think right now. They're just out. They took a loss in their conference tournament, so they're no Pool A path for them either.
All right. Yeah, as you mentioned, with that Conn College, Albertus Magnus, St. Joseph, we're going with the same order we were wrong with last week. But as we kept looking, took another look at it, we felt like the way that the data shifted from last week to this week was more in our favor. So this is not just being stubborn, trying to push through what we thought a week ago. We did take another look at it, and just the way some of the winning percentages and strength of schedules, we think is shifted even more in that favor. So hopefully we're right this time, Matt.
Yeah,
we'll find out when that bonus episode drops.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, Matt. Let's get on to Region 2, where, not surprisingly, Keene State, we believe, will hold on to the top spot, followed by Nichols, and then Clark, who we've had there on the strength mostly of their season sweep of WPI, because it looks like between 3 and 4 there, it comes down to a head-to-head comparison between Clark and WPI. Clark with a definite advantage there. Western New England fifth, followed by, Matt, this is going to be a controversial one, Brandeis, rounding out the Region 2 rankings. Of course, just 6 ranked spots here in Region 2, the smallest of the 10 regions. All other regions will have 7 ranked teams. Region 2, of course, with 6 ranked teams.
Yeah, we need to start a running count of UAA teams we are projecting into the regional rankings with a sub 600 winning percentage. Counts at 1. Okay. Region 2 here, the counts at 1. I think this was the same order that we predicted last week. This is the same order we saw the regional committees come out with. So this was we're kind of just locking it in. We think it's pretty strong. Definitely 1, 2, 3, 4. Is there maybe even a conversation about Western New England and Brandeis? But Brandeis picked up some regionally ranked results with Carnegie Mellon coming into the rankings this week. So they look strong there, even though they're lost this week and their winning percentage got worse. Do some of their other numbers look better to maybe make them jump Western New England? I don't know. That's maybe a conversation. For now, we're going to go with the same 6 in the same order and call that good. We'll see how that ends up. I don't really think that there's a path for Endicott, let's say, who's just outside of the rankings in our mind to jump in. So again, we felt really comfortable staying with these same 6. As far as tournament picture, Keene State is an absolute lock. They're in a position to maybe host a first weekend game. Not for sure on Keene State hosting, but I think that's a definite possibility. I think Nichols looks probably bubble in. I think they look pretty good right now. Clark and WPI, though, I think are deeper on the bubble. They're both going to want to make deep NUMAC runs, definitely to the final. But it might be a Pool A for either of those, Pool A or nothing. So definitely, if you're in the NUMAC, try to win your Pool A, because there might not be a guarantee of Pool C, also depending on how many upsets there around the country. For Western New England, I think they're a Pool A only team. I don't think they have a Pool C shot. And Brandeis, I don't think they have a Pool C shot, and they don't have a shot in the UAA race anymore, so we won't see Brandeis come tournament time.
Yeah, Matt, you mentioned the possibility. You can't discount the possibility that Brandeis comes in 5th here. And as much as we hate the idea of 583 winning percentage Brandeis being here, just the winning percentage gap with Endicott is not that big. You start looking at the strength of schedule, the difference in the results versus regionally ranked opponents, and I don't see an alternative to Brandeis staying in the region 2 rankings here.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they're going to be in. And this is what we've seen the committee value, and I don't know that it's right or wrong, but I think this is what we've seen the committee tell us that they're going to do, and I would not be surprised to see them in. We do always need to have the conversation about, when we're talking about winning percentage and strength of schedule and results versus regionally ranked opponents, how many times are we double counting those types of things, particularly for a conference like the UAA, multi-region, lots of opportunities to get teams ranked. A team like Brandeis, not a good resume. Everyone in the conference gets to play twice and maybe pick up a win or two against regionally ranked opponents. That's one of the it's a strong conference. It's like number 1 or number 2 in total conference strength. So obviously they deserve to have those high strength of schedules and a lot of good games. I just wonder, like, games like Brandeis counting, and in other places around the country, we get equally strong teams or stronger teams not counting for your quote unquote good wins. It's just a little bit of a struggle for me sometimes, but I think we see Brandeis ranked, and I think we're going to have to move on.
Hooray. All right, Region 3, Matt. Oswego State looks strong at the top there, followed by Hobart. And then we had some interesting discussions here. We went with St. Lawrence third, followed by Utica, RPI, Farmingdale State, and then Nazareth is who we are projecting as the 7 there in Region 3. It gets really interesting, Matt, because you have some disparate resumes when you look at winning percentage and strength of schedule.
Yeah, definitely an interesting region, a region that got very messy this week as RPI took 2 losses. They were a team that we saw toward the top half of the region. So we're kind of all over the map. RPI now, we have slotted in, what's that, 5th, 600 winning percentage, 550-ish strength of schedule. But then right next to them, we have Farmingdale State, 920 winning percentage, 457 strength of schedule. It's really tough to make those decisions, first of all, or predict what another committee is going to do with those. We kind of looked at how they ranked the teams last week and how each resume moved. and then tried to decide, which resumes were most similar to where they were last week, and then did a team kind of move up or down relative to those. We think even at the 600 winning percentage that RPI is not going to move all the way out. We expect them to stay in the regional rankings. That 554 strength of schedule and those regionally ranked opponent wins, Hobart and St. Lawrence, that look obviously a lot better than anything Farmingdale has in those categories, better than what Nazareth has in those categories. So we think RPI has a chance to stay above those two teams. Maybe Utica slides up, but even that is a tough decision. The 468 strength of schedule for Utica is not great. Their regionally ranked wins are okay. A win against Connecticut College was maybe solidly middle of Region 1 last week. It's now sliding in Region 1, we think, this week. Nazareth is the bottom in this region. So it's not a ton of strength there, but they have a couple of results that are positive. So I could see, I think Oswego is locked in at 1, Hobart, St. Lawrence. I think those are your top 3. Take that to the bank. And then I think Nazareth is 7th and Brockport is out. But between Utica, RPI, and Farmingdale, I could almost see any order among those 3.
And one other thing we did look at, just given the difference in the profile of the resume between Utica and RPI, was there was a common opponents factor in favor of Utica, and that helped us, despite the lower strength of schedule, maintain that Utica position over RPI with the winning percentage. Not a lot to be gained in terms of the RROs. So the common opponents was something we looked at between Utica and RPI, and that was another thing that was in favor of Utica.
Yeah, and we never know. Like, we talk about non-conference strength of schedule probably more often than they use it. We see Utica with a low strength of schedule, but their non-conference number doesn't really look like it's helping them out that much. So, I don't think it's not like looks like they tried to schedule too much out of conference. So maybe that hurts them. There's a lot of factors the committee could look at, but we kind of landed on this one, and we'll see how it goes. But as far as the tournament picture, Oswego State, we're very comfortable with Oswego State. They're definitely looking good. Hobart is probably, what did we decide on Hobart, Zach? Probably maybe bubble out starting at Hobart.
Yeah, well, when you consider that there's going to be some bid thieves, right? And so you can't just look at it as like a top 22. That's where Hobart maybe looks a little bit more bubble-ish or even to bubble out. So Hobart will definitely be one of those teams, should they need a Pool C bid, that would want to see as few upsets as possible, because that could really impact them.
Yeah, and maybe a similar,
but very bubblish. Yeah,
bubblish, and a similar position for St. Lawrence. If they're the two teams in the Liberty League final, I guess I don't know what the bracket looks like in the Liberty League off the top of my head if they can play in the final, but for those teams to feel any sort of good about the Pool C position, they probably at least want to make it to the championship game. But really, you're in the position where, Pool A, or else you're not feeling great come Selection Sunday. And then Utica and below, we're not Pool C viable down there.
Yep. All right, let's move to Region 4, Matt, where we have NYU at the top. We're going to maintain Rowan second, DeSales third, but Rowan taking a loss definitely tightens that up. I don't think we'd be shocked to see that flip, but for right now, I think we're comfortable with Rowan maintaining that lead over DeSales. And then, Matt, you get into a really interesting comparison here. We're going to go with Stockton 4th, TCNJ 5th, Stevens 6th, and Ramapo 7th. Now, with these 4, I think the order could get completely shuffled. We wouldn't necessarily be shocked by that. And in particular, putting Stevens between TCNJ and Ramapo is really trying to thread a needle. But considering what we saw last week in the regional rankings, that we think it's possible. But again, it's such a narrow thread there, but to slot them between the two, that the order here really could be up in the air.
Yeah, we saw last week that Stevens was slotted between these two teams last week, but the order was flipped. And then based on the results in the NJAC this last week, Ramapo and TCNJ kind of traded resumes. So it looks kind of like the numbers almost flopped. So we kind of thought, okay, TCNJ would be up higher. Ramapo probably fell down below Stevens, but maybe Stevens does stay there right in the middle. We looked into some numbers and common opponents and tried to figure if there's anything there. But at the end of the day, that's kind of where we slid in. Zach, you mentioned the other interesting conversation is right up toward the top with Rowan and DeSales. Two interesting resumes, and I think that tightened up this week with Rowan taking a loss. DeSales has the really great 920 winning percentage, but their strength of schedule is really mediocre when it comes to the national picture, regional ranking, and selection picture at 525. But there's definitely a conversation to be had there. I think we liked overall the number and quality of Rowan's regionally ranked wins. We think maybe Eastern is a better win than DeSales has. That strength of schedule gap is still huge. So even though there's a big winning percentage gap, we did see Rowan ranked ahead last week, and we do
Right.
definitely acknowledge that it tightened up. It's very close now, but we think Rowan will just stay ahead of DeSales. Again, not completely shocked if that flips this week, but for right now, I think we're going to stick with Rowan and DeSales. The other, I think, really interesting one to me is Stockton's position given their winning percentage. It's only 640. But when you look at Stockton in particular with their 5 regionally ranked wins and the quality of those regionally ranked wins, a win over Keene State, 2 wins over Rowan, we think that that is a significant resume boost, something that will stick out to the positive that's going to kind of keep Stockton in the middle of this region more at number 4.
Right. Really trying to take cues from what we've seen in the previous regional rankings to inform our decisions here for regional ranking 3. All right, Matt, in terms of bubble picture, I think we decided that the top 3 in this region are looking solid for a pool C should they need it. But below that, there's work to be done. And now, already in some cases, there's that it's not going to be possible for any more work to be done because TCNJ knocked Ramapo out of the NJAC tournament already. And TCNJ now gets a meeting with Rowan in the semifinal. So Ramapo not in good position with no games left to play here.
Yeah, like you said, Stockton, TCNJ, Stevens, they would like to continue to improve their resume as much as possible, I think, to try to get in. I think maybe those teams are all kind of bubblish right now. So we'll have to see how that goes. NJAC tournament's going to be a big one. There's some interesting teams left, some good teams, and I think anyone can win it. So it'll be interesting to see kind of who makes the finals, what the picture looks like with that in place, and then who ultimately grabs the Pool A there.
Region 5, Matt, where we saw Widener, a strong presence in the top 16 reveal last week and a strong number 1 for us in Region 5 here. It got a little bit interesting behind Widener. Hood and Catholic, we had a discussion about, but ultimately felt better about Hood because of the quantity and quality of their results versus regionally ranked opponents. And then with those 3 settled, Eastern was a pretty easy number 4. And then, Matt, you get into the mess that is the Centennial Conference. We think that, if you went 8 deep here, you would have 4 Centennial Conference teams in the mix. Of course, only 7 will get ranked. We feel like, Swarthmore is a real contender there to come in 5th, followed by Johns Hopkins and Gettysburg, which leaves Franklin and Marshall on the outside looking in. And Matt, this was a real doozy to try to figure out, not only because of the resumes, but because they're all in the same conference. You get at these weird, A beat B, beat C kind of situations. And even though Swarthmore has the lowest winning percentage, we felt like they stood out in all the other criteria categories that we put them in the 5th spot there.
Yeah, let's talk about the Centennial Conference because that is an absolute mess. I'm going to caveat this entire conversation. You and I talked about this on our fake rack call on Sunday afternoon. We would really almost not be surprised any order that you came out with these Centennial teams. Swarthmore could be the team that's out. They could be on top of all these teams. You could almost mix them up any direction and it would be fine. And you could logic your way through it. To me, it comes down to how exactly does the committee treat multi-team comparisons? Will they compare 4 teams at once? Do they try to pare it down to 3? Once you get 4 in, it gets really messy with all the variables. I'll talk through how we came out of our decision. You kind of mentioned it already. We looked at what are resume pieces that stand out as positive outliers. We saw Swarthmore's strength of schedule. We saw Swarthmore's 4 wins against regionally ranked opponents, including against a number 1 like NYU, a pretty strong number 1. And then also another good win against DeSales. And then as far as winning percentage goes, Hopkins, Gettysburg, and Franklin and Marshall are all tied. But then among them, Hopkins has the best strength of schedule, which is a significant step up, kind of 30 points higher than them. So we use the strength of Swarthmore's strength of schedule and good regionally ranked wins to slot them above everyone else. We used Johns Hopkins essentially 30-point strength of schedule advantage to say that they get an advantage over Gettysburg and Franklin and Marshall. And then we also use the fact that Gettysburg has an additional regionally ranked win against WPI to kind of slot them in the seventh spot. Now we also note Franklin and Marshall beat Gettysburg twice, and Gettysburg beat Johns Hopkins twice, and Johns Hopkins beat Franklin and Marshall twice. We think that those three teams, if you kind of take Swarthmore's like good wins and say, okay, like maybe they're just going to be above, and then you take the other three teams together, you almost kind of have to ignore the head-to-heads because there's a triangle there. So if you ignore those head-to-heads, that's why we came up with Hopkins because of the strength of schedule advantage and Gettysburg because of the additional regionally ranked win advantage. It gets really complicated. If they actually compared all four of those teams together at once, then the head-to-head records among those teams, Swarthmore's the worst at, I think, just whatever it is, 2-4, I think. And everyone else had 3 wins or something like that. Or no, actually, Gettysburg was the best. They had 4 wins. So that could change the order entirely. It comes down to how exactly is the committee going to compare these teams together. This is what we picked, and I just told you why. But again, I would not be surprised to see something different.
Right. This is one of our discussions is how does it actually play out? Like, is it like a whittling down process where you might come down to a final spot where it's a direct head-to-head Gettysburg and Franklin and Marshall, and then Franklin and Marshall has an advantage because they have the sweep over Gettysburg. But like you said, if it's a you know, a 3-team comparison between Hopkins, Gettysburg, and Franklin and Marshall, you leave it as a 3 teams and say, okay, we're out of this 3, we're going to pick 2 out of the 3,
Yeah.
and then that triangle helps negate some of those head-to-heads. Well, then maybe it's Johns Hopkins and Gettysburg for the reason you explained.
Yeah.
I feel like from what we've heard after, we were wrong with some of the predictions in the alphabetical ranking, that sometimes these multi-team comparisons can lead to results that are a little bit different than like the head-to-head. I feel like that suggests to me that it doesn't work where, okay, out of these 3, we're going to take this team or eliminate this team, and therefore we're left with a head-to-head. It tells me that out of a group, they're making decisions of, picking like 2 out of 3, as opposed to, okay, we're going to take this one. Now it's a head-to-head between the remaining 2.
Yeah, so like if you're picking 3 teams to compare against and you're putting 3 teams on your board, now you're left with picking the order of those 3 teams based on what's on your screen, comparing all 3 at once. And even if you pick who's number 1, it then doesn't become a comparison between the other 2. It still stays a 3-team comparison, and you're comparing only within. So I think that's something we're kind of maybe learning, that's maybe the case, is that even if once you have a 3-team comparison, it always stays as a 3-team comparison. Even after you've determined who's the number 1, it doesn't then become just a 2-team comparison. I think you and I are both thinking that's what their committees are telling us.
And this is also close enough, Matt. We could see the actual Region 5 rankings. We could be totally wrong on the order of these last 3 spots and still feel like we've learned nothing about how we could have modified the process to come out with a different result. It's all just that close.
Yeah.
And it really just depends on how your process actually plays out to make those decisions. So, yeah, like you said, take those 4 Centennial teams, throw them in a blender, pull names out of a hat, whatever. But here's what we're going with for this week. We'll see what happens.
And then as far as the Region 5 bubble picture, Widener, Hood, Catholic, they're all locks. They're all closer to hosting games than being out of the tournament. I think Eastern is probably bubble in. I think they're feeling pretty good right now. And then the Centennial teams are probably more bubble out. I think the Centennial is going to be a 1-bid league this year.
Moving on to Region 6, Matt, one of the deepest, toughest regions there is. But from week 2 to week 3, we felt like there wasn't really any reason to change the top 5 from their spots last week. So just as we saw last week, Hampton-Sydney, number 1, Randolph-Macon, number 2, followed by Guilford, Virginia Wesleyan, and Christopher Newport, rounding out the top 5 in Region 6. Matt, Roanoke was 7th last week, but the way that the numbers have shifted, they look better than they looked in their kind of comparison group there at the back end. Emory had a tough weekend, but Matt, we think that they're still going to take that last spot here in Region 6. Mostly coming down to a comparison with Mary Washington. Emory holds a head-to-head advantage over Mary Washington. They beat them earlier this season. Also, a slight strength of schedule advantage, and just a dominating performance over Mary Washington in terms of results versus regionally ranked
Yeah.
opponents.
Yeah. Like you said, we made a switch. Roanoke 6th, Emory 7th. Not even convinced that actually ends up happening. One thing I'm just interested to see is how do they handle Emory's 6-8 record versus regionally ranked opponents. I think that does stand out as a positive. There's a way maybe Emory still slides in 6th. We'll slot them 7th for now. But you're right, Zach. I think the next comparison would be how does Emory fare against a team like Mary Washington? Emory has the strength of schedule advantage. There's a pretty sizable gap in winning percentage opening up there, but Emory's got the head-to-head, and then all these other regionally ranked wins that they got in UAA play, including a better, I guess Mary Washington's win against Hood and Emory's win against Washington U are going to be fairly similar at this point now. So maybe those are good wins, but then Emory's got, 5 more in the bag as well. So it'll be interesting. I think there's a world in which the committee does go with Mary Washington because they do have a strong strength of schedule and a 640 winning percentage. I can see that jumping up, but the 2-9, man, Mary Washington's had a ton of chances to pick up more regionally ranked wins, and they haven't really gotten them. They've only gotten those 2. I think that's going to hurt them. So I think that's why we're going to go with Emory, and I think that moves the counter up to 2 UAA teams that we're projecting into the regional rankings with sub 600 winning percentages. And in this region, it's not really because we don't have other viable options. It's just that their resume is so bulked up with those regionally ranked wins, and regionally ranked games in total, that I think that they stand out as a team who we kind of know is of the quality of a regionally ranked team, right? Because they're kind of 500-y against those other teams.
Right. And that's one of the points we made as we were discussing it earlier on today, just as we were putting together our predictions, is that you look at the difference in regionally ranked games played between Emory and Mary Washington, and the entire difference goes to the win column for Emory.
Right.
So, yeah, they've played more, but, the losses are very similar. The wins stand out for Emory.
Yep, exactly. The Region 6 picture is very strong. Hampton City, Randolph, Macon, Guilford, they're all looking great. They're all looking like at least 2 of those are going to host, if not all 3. I think Virginia Wesleyan, Christopher Newport are probably solidly into the tournament at this point. Roanoke, probably a Pool A only team. They're definitely going to want to get at least to the ODAC final. If they get there, that means they've probably beaten another good team to boost their resume. They could really use another regionally ranked win or 2 to feel pretty good about that. But they also, they can't afford too much on the winning percentage to drop. So they probably need like 2 out of 3 in ODAC play at the very minimum. Even that might not be enough. So Roanoke's probably a Pool A or bust. And Emory, Zach, I think Sunday's loss for Emory kind of knocked them out of contention. If they win next week, they only get to 600. I don't think their strength of schedule and regionally ranked wins are going to overcome that, because especially the regionally ranked wins, it's lacking some of that top-notch quality that maybe we saw at Rochester last year. So I think Emory is going to be done.
Region 7. Matt, we see a change at the top of Region 7 coming here with Case Western Reserve in the top spot, followed by John Carroll, Trine, Calvin, and then, Matt, it's always interesting to have the discussion about, this kind of profile with Carnegie Mellon. And then we have Hope coming in 6th, followed by Mount Union to round out Region 7.
Yeah, just a few interesting talking points in this region, I think. First of all, at the top, John Carroll and Case Western Reserve. We picked Case this week. We had previously seen John Carroll. There's a pretty sizable winning percentage gap between those two teams, about 90 points, and the strength of schedules are pretty even. But we went ahead and made the flip because of Case Western does have one of those ridiculous type results versus regionally ranked opponent records. 10-4. That's outstanding. John Carroll just 2-1. John Carroll's 2 wins are against Mount Union, who we see kind of sliding down this region the last few weeks. Case Western Reserve has a win against NYU. They have a win against Oswego State. They have a win against Washington U. Those are some really good wins against teams at the top of other regions. So we think at the strength of that, Case Western will pass John Carroll. Now, I would not be completely shocked if that's not quite a switch yet, but I think 10-4, that just looks overwhelming at this point to me. And I think we're going to go that direction. Trine, I think, is solidly third. They have a very similar resume with Calvin at this point, with the addition of a win against UW Platteville. So that's really in Trine's favor. I think Trine is solidly third. Zach, we did have the discussion point Calvin versus Carnegie Mellon this week. Carnegie Mellon's been winning games. They're up to 667 winning percentage, just a hair below 600 on their strength of schedule, 6 regionally ranked wins, and some really good ones. So I think you could start having the conversation of, does Carnegie pass Calvin? And that's not because of anything bad Calvin's been doing. They've been adding to their resume as well. They just got a win over Trine this weekend. It's really just because Carnegie's been a little bit on a roll, and I think they're now looking strong nationally, whereas they were more marginal a couple weeks ago. I think they're strong nationally. So we could see any order. I think maybe Calvin stays just because we're still talking about 200 some points of winning percentage and a good strength of schedule for Calvin, with some now better results versus regionally ranked opponents. But that'll be an interesting one to watch, is exactly where does Carnegie slot there. And then Hope and Mount Union. We also had the conversation with Marietta. I think we should talk about this for a few minutes here, Zach. We kept Hope and Mount Union, the two teams we saw last week, but we flipped their order. Mount Union has now lost all of their regionally ranked wins due to changes in the regional rankings. They're 0-2 now. Hope does have one win against Calvin. So even though they have the same winning percentage and Mount Union has a 17-point advantage in the strength of schedule, we felt that maybe the 0-2 was going to be a significant negative for Mount Union, and that even one win against a regionally ranked opponent for Hope was maybe going to overcome that gap right now. Not 100% sure that's going to be the case, but I think that's the argument we made. And we also considered Marietta for a while. Marietta has a higher strength of schedule than either of these teams, 12 points even higher than Mount Union. They have a season split with Mount Union, but they also have two other results or wins versus regionally ranked opponents. One against Illinois Wesleyan, who we saw was a number 1 in Region 8, kind of a weaker number 1, but they were a number 1 in Region 8 last week. And then a win against Christopher Newport, who's kind of solidly in the middle of Region 6. So definitely if we're looking for good wins, I think Marietta stands out among those other three as a team who does have the good wins that are missing.
Yeah, I think ultimately we felt like the 640 wasn't enough to bring them into the conversation. But yeah, we definitely had that conversation because, the strength of schedule, the results versus regionally ranked opponents are pretty compelling with what we see there compared to Hope and Mount Union. Matt, the other thing in Hope's favor is that they have a non-conference win against Wilmington, who swept Mount Union in OAC play. So that was another advantage. Maybe we wouldn't have made that flip except for the common opponent adjustment as well.
Right, yeah, that was their only common opponent. Hope was 1-0, Mount Union was 0-2. We felt that was also going to weigh in Hope's favor. But yeah, I think this just shows, though, for Marietta, if they can get to the OAC final, and in doing so probably knocking off, again, I don't know their brackets, but that'd be either John Carroll or Mount Union knocking off to get there. Adding that other regionally ranked win, higher strength of schedule, does that then ultimately get them into the regional rankings? It might. Probably not into the Pool C picture. Probably Marietta needs the Pool A, but it might get them into the regional rankings if they can get to the final. And then let's talk bubble picture for Region 7 here. I think at this point, Case Western, John Carroll, obviously locks, Trine, Calvin, I think Carnegie Mellon. Now they're probably all locked in. I think that those teams are all feeling good into the tournament. Hope and Mount Union would be more bubble out, I think, right now. And both of those teams need to build on their resumes, definitely, in their conference tournaments. And they probably need to be aiming for the Pool A to feel good about the tournament.
Yep. Similar situation earlier we talked about when you factor in for some bid thieves, that's where Hope and Mount Union could be in trouble. But both of them have a lot of opportunity to add to their resume with their respective conference tournaments.
Yep. Yeah.
Even if they don't ultimately win it and get that AQ. All right, on to Region 8, where we have another mess on our hands. Matt, let's start at the top here to talk about some of the good. Wash U, we think, will take the top spot from Illinois Wesleyan here this week as the data changed over the course of the week. It really was in Wash U's favor. Not that Illinois Wesleyan had a bad week, but just in the totality of the change in terms of, all the criteria points seem to move in Wash U's favor. We think they'll take the top spot, followed by Illinois Wesleyan. And at that point, Matt, Elmhurst really stands out as a strong number 3, pretty obvious there. And then the mess. Wisconsin Lutheran, we think we think will be fourth, followed by Anderson. Chicago, Matt, there's number 3, our third UAA with a sub 600 winning percentage entering the regional rankings. Chicago number 6, followed by Carthage here in Region 8.
Yeah, let's first go up at the top. I think Wash U and Illinois Wesleyan both had good weeks. Wash U did go out and get a really good win against NYU, so that happened in their favor. They also just, as you said, got data shifting in their favor with like Carnegie Mellon, for example, jumping into the regional rankings last week, added regionally ranked wins to Wash U's resume. They had a few instances like that, and one of the big differences with Illinois Wesleyan and Wash U last week was the disparity in regionally ranked wins. That closed all the way this week. There's still the head-to-head win in Illinois Wesleyan's favor, but now considering that the RROs have closed up, there's a big strength of schedule gap in Wash U's favor that I think now the head-to-head is not going to overcome. So I think we're going to go Bears 1, Titans 2. Like you said, Elmhurst is an easy 3. Then we don't really know what to do. I think we saw Wisconsin Lutheran. We saw Chicago, I think, 4th last week, and then Wisconsin Lutheran 5th, if I remember my order correctly. Chicago did take, 2 losses this week in UAA play, so they fell pretty significantly on the win percentage. It's hard to say. There's now about 300-point gap in winning percentage between Chicago and Anderson and Wisconsin Lutheran. We're talking like 60 points in the SOS, so it's like big swings either side. Chicago has a huge RRO advantage. They're like the only one left in the rest of this region that has any sort of significant wins. Like Carthage has one good win against Elmhurst, and I think that stands out as such a good positive in this region. So I'm not really, I could see Chicago still like 4th, let's say, just because I think the committee values those good wins, and they have some of those, like a win against Case, a win against Wash U. Those are really good. I could see Chicago stay 4th for whatever reason. I think they'll just take Wisconsin Lutheran and Anderson together. Their resumes are so similar right now. They're kind of shackled together, it almost looks like. Like where you take one, you're going to take the other one. And they're a step up right now from St. Norbert. And we've seen St. Norbert's head-to-head win against Wisconsin Lutheran not really ever getting them above Wisconsin Lutheran. So I think they stay below. So we're not exactly sure where Chicago is going to slot in. I think Carthage probably falls in below the Wisconsin Lutheran and Anderson duo, just because we see 200 points of winning percentage there, and the strength of schedule is 20 points, so significant but not that significant. They have one good regionally ranked win, so I think it's Carthage 7th. St. Norbert and Hanover just out. Really will be interested to see what they do at Chicago. I can see a world in which they start saying like under 550 guys here, that's too low, and maybe Carthage moves up a spot and St. Norbert does move in. I could see that happening. But I think everything they've shown us is we're going to value what your strength of schedule is, and we're going to look for good wins. Chicago has those two things, and especially when you're looking at the bottom of a weak region where we're either taking like dreadfully low strength of schedules or teams that are still only in like the 600s winning percentage. I think Chicago has a definite case to be ranked here.
Yeah, and this is where I feel like we're up against competing messaging that we've received from committee members over the last 2 years, right, Matt? On one hand, we hear, your winning percentage gets you to the table. Well, does Chicago at 542 do that? Maybe, but and then we also hear about it's about the totality of your resume, right? And in that regard, if you're looking at the totality of the resume, well, Chicago stands out from some of these other options in a few different ways. So, it's just a case of with so limited options, there's warts all over the place here. When you start looking at it more in a totality of the resume type, context, that's where you see Chicago, staying in the mix. And I think with them being 4th last week, that shows how strongly, that resume that Chicago had was seen, a week ago. So that even if they took a couple losses, like there's a bunch of strengths that are still there. So yeah, maybe they fall, but I think it makes sense that they don't fall all the way out. As much as we probably wouldn't want to see all these UAAs with sub 600, and just the fact that they come from the UAA and you have that multi-region conference thing in effect. I think if this was that resume from a team that's a HCAC team, for instance. I don't think we really care or have that big of a discussion about it, but the way that this then impacts other teams' resumes in terms of them adding regionally ranked wins, that's going to be a big impact then on like, well, Carnegie Mellon lost, but like a Case or an NYU. And as these decisions need to get made about, who's hosting, seating, that type of thing, it has cascading effects.
Yeah, and I think another point you made. I don't know if you made this on Twitter or you made it to me in a text, but it's also going to test the idea of whether or not there are floors. Right? We keep hearing the committee say
Right.
there's no floors. So is a team like Chicago? There's no floor. There's no winning percentage floor. If you have a stronger resume across the board, totality of the resume, in the committee's mind, I think again important to note, we're predicting what the committee is going to do, not necessarily saying how we would interpret the criteria. But
Right.
in their mind, if this is the totality of the resume and there's no floors, I think they would have no problem ranking Chicago sixth, fourth, fifth in this region. But again, we hear it's your winning percentage gets you to the table. St. Norbert at 800, are they at the table as well as 500? Like, what's the winning percentage exactly that gets you there? So it's going to be interesting to see what they do. Really fascinated here. I could see Chicago out. I could see Chicago up at fourth again. Probably sixth or seventh, though.
Right. And ultimately, you can say, Matt, the bubble, Elmhurst is probably like a bubble out type team.
Yeah.
Anyone below them, we're not really talking bubble. But it does. So in that sense, it doesn't matter because none of these teams are going to get in anyway. But because regional rankings are used to define good wins,
Yes.
it does make a matter. It does matter because Chicago then counts towards
Right.
all these other UAA teams and anyone that played Chicago. But of course, being a conference schedule, that's going to be 2 games on a UAA team's resume.
And we're not really trying to pick on the UAA. They're just sort of unique. The coast to coast is also in this mold where they're multi-regional conference. And now this is the third region we've seen with a very marginal, I'll call it marginal UAA resume at the bottom of the regional rankings that count. So that's 6 regionally ranked games that the UAA conference teams get by these under 600 winning percentage teams sticking into the bottom of the region. That would be very difficult to happen if they were like the 42, 41 other conferences that all exist within one region. It would be very difficult to get all of these teams into the same regional rankings. You'd be losing 2, 4, 6 regionally ranked games from your schedule, which doesn't necessarily change the top quality wins. It just changes the amount, the obscene numbers we see. They might fall more in line with other teams like an Elmhurst up here, 3-2. Like we might see more of these UAA teams in line with that. So there's just a lot more opportunities. They're good teams. Like I'm not against counting a Chicago as a good game, but we just saw in Region 7, teams that played Marietta don't get to count that as a good game. And they're just in line with an Emory, a Brandeis, a Chicago, if not better than a couple of those teams, right? They're no worse than even with those teams. So it's just a challenge, especially with the more limited, like per the handbook, we should rank 20% of teams, but then we're capping that at 7. If we had more ranked spots, I think we would get a better look at the quality of teams. But I understand a few years ago when they had up to 10 ranked teams per region that the committee thought they were doing too much work. And I get that. But I think the line at 7 is where we run into these challenges where we're counting some teams that are marginal and we're not counting some teams that are as good or better.
I've said it before and I'll keep saying it, Matt. Every single problem there is with this process gets solved by measuring good wins by something other than the regional ranking process.
Yeah, right.
Well,
right.
yeah, then this week's process. Yeah. There's a lot of sorting that gets worked out through the regional rankings, right? And in some cases that filters out some teams. And that the fact that the UAA is spread across so many regions, that doesn't happen. Go back to what we talked about with the Centennial, right, Matt? That making those decisions, we had 3 spots for 4 teams. That means someone's getting left out. When you spread, if you take those exact resumes and you have the ability to, okay, we're going to put 1 in Region 8, 1 in Region 3, we probably are easily taking all 4 of those resumes, but because they're jammed into one region, there's a natural sorting process that has to take place. And that's what's lost, I think, with these multi-region conferences. All right.
Yep.
Glad we could use that as a little soapbox moment. Shall we go on to Region 9, where again, we're going to see a sorting process take out because we've got the American Rivers Conference just, kind of dominating the Region 9 picture here, both in and just off, as we will see. Matt, we see Platteville at the top of Region 9 here, followed by Nebraska Wesleyan and Co., who we saw, and we talked about married in your top 25 ballot, followed by Dubuque. And then we had a real discussion about the last three spots, Matt, between four teams. We went with Loras 5th, St. John's 6th, Bethany Lutheran 7th, and that left American Rivers member Central on the outside looking in the week 3 regional rankings.
Yeah, so starting at the top of this region, the top three, we just left alone. I think it makes sense given what the resumes were last week, and we saw them ranked and what happened, that those are gonna hold. We last week Dubuque was behind Loras. We made that switch, jumping Dubuque back up. Dubuque has beaten Loras this week, and so that turned into a season split, whereas previously Loras had a 1-0 head-to-head. I think now, given that split, you see Dubuque's record being even with Loras and the strength of schedule significantly higher. And now the regionally ranked wins coming more in line. I think it's easy to say, to me, for Dubuque to go back above. We made the decision to have Loras stay fifth, even though there's a strength of schedule gap between them and St. John's. We felt like they had some regionally ranked win quality that St. John's did not quite have. 2 wins against Nebraska Wesleyan and a win against Dubuque, all being probably better than St. John's best win, which was against Stockton. So I think we were keeping Loras there. Just, again, quality of top-ranked wins is something I think we've seen the committee value. And I think that was one reason they were valuing Loras fourth last week. And then the last three were really tricky to us. St. John's we had jumping back in. Bethany Lutheran and Central coming in right behind them. That was tough. We brought in some multi-team comparisons. We ultimately also did note that Bethany Lutheran still has a win at Central on their resume. But again, we're getting to that resume disparity thing where Central has the highest strength of schedule, but the lowest winning percentage. Bethany Lutheran, the highest winning percentage, but the lowest strength of schedule. How do you sort these teams and slot these teams is a little bit difficult. Last week we saw it was St. John's out and Bethany Lutheran was still above Central. We thought that based on the results this week, that could still hold, that Bethany Lutheran was still above Central. But St. John's resume improved this week, and we thought they had a chance to jump into the rankings. But I think we also noted in our conversation that these three teams are another three-team grouping that we wouldn't really be that shocked to see in almost any order at the end of the day from the committee.
Right. Yeah, we also felt like St. John's had a common opponent advantage over Bethany Lutheran. But again, as we've talked about before, depending on how you do some of these multi-team comparisons, maybe that is apparent, maybe that kind of gets washed away. So we'll see. Interesting discussions here at the back of Region 9. And then, but, Central, if they move out, obviously that has implications there for the rest of the American Rivers teams, because that's a regionally ranked opponent game that will move off of their resume.
Yeah. As far as bubble picture, I think Platteville, Nebraska Wesleyan, and Co. are all very solid. Probably Dubuque as well. I think they're all looking good. Loras is still going to have a little bit of a question mark on their strength of schedule. I think they have the RROs, the requisite results versus regionally ranked opponents. They have the strength of schedule. They're going to want to build that resume through the ARC tournament, probably get to the final to feel really good. That way they can maybe boost their SOS as much as possible and get it above 500, give them good reasons to be. They probably want to still aim at that Pool A. That way if you miss, you've still made the final. St. John's, Bethany Lutheran, Central, they're probably all more bubble teams, maybe more toward bubble out by the time you get bid thieves and the like. I think they're all probably teams that are interested in winning the Pool A. Especially Central, they're getting a little bit more dicey on the winning percentage. They're not, at the very least, get to the ARC championship game and kind of hold that 667. You don't want to dip below that. Their strength of schedule and results versus regionally ranked are not strong enough, like we've seen some UAA teams who might be able to get in at 640.
Matt, we usually talk at this time of year, you'd rather have a winning percentage problem than a strength of schedule problem. But what comes to mind for Loras is they're in the right conference to if they can make a run and maybe lose in a conference tournament final they will have played some really good
Hmm.
SOS games along the way, right? Sometimes we see where a team has to play like a first round game in a conference tournament and it's against a bottom feeder or a lower tier team, and that really hurts them. But, with the American Rivers, you see strong strength of schedules across the board, and that's largely because the conference as a whole did really well in out of conference play, brought a ton of wins into league play. And so pretty much whoever you're going to get matched up with through a run through the conference tournament there in the American Rivers is you're going to get some really strong SOS games. And so I would expect that number to be boosted quite easily. Will it be enough? We'll see. But one of the rare cases where maybe having an SOS problem at this point is okay, as long as they're able to, get enough games in to really see that rise over the next week. All right, one region to go. Region 10. Okay, Matt, we talked about the top here. We thought it was very close between Kalu and Trinity, but the RRO quantity and quality gave the slight edge to Kalu. So we're going to expect Kalu to come in number one in Region 10 this week, followed by Trinity, Texas. Matt, St. Thomas picked up a second win on the season against Trinity. That really stood out. You look at the record or the results versus regionally ranked opponents, they're 3-0 there, including those two wins against
Yeah.
Trinity. So we went with St. Thomas third, Pomona Pitzer fourth, followed by Claremont Mudd Scripps and Hardin Simmons. And then, Matt, it got really interesting talking about this last spot in Region 10. Last week, we were a bit surprised to see that it was Redlands in the seventh spot. We expected Whitworth. We really wanted to dig in and look at what those numbers were going into last week. That we saw the committee come out with Redlands from that process, and so we really started, based on that, we started looking at it, and this came down to a Mary Hardin Baylor versus Redlands comparison for us. And you look at the winning percentage, exactly the same at 625. Strength of schedule, slight advantage for Mary Hardin Baylor, 538 to 530, both with two wins over regionally ranked opponents, including one that's the same. They've both beaten Illinois Wesleyan. Mary Hardin Baylor adds Hardin Simmons. Redlands adds Williams. Very, very close across the board. Ultimately, Matt, just that slight overall strength of schedule difference, we decided to go with Mary Hardin Baylor, but this is like razor thin margin right here.
Yeah, and another instance where we don't know exactly how the committee is going to use that results versus regionally ranked opponents category, right? We see Mary Hardin Baylor 2-3, Redlands 2-7. One thing I see when I see 2-7 is you had a lot of opportunities to prove yourself as a equal to other regionally ranked teams, and for the most part, you did not take advantage of that opportunity. So, like for example, Redlands being in the SCIAC, they would have played Pomona Pitzer and Claremont Mudd Scripps two times each, and they went 0-4 those games. Those are two teams in the middle of this region. Maybe get a win or two there and kind of build your RRO resume. I don't know if they're going to see that 2-7. Not that 2-7 is too much of a negative, but you didn't take advantage of your opportunities, kind of a thing, right? So is that how they're going to look at that? Mary Hardin Baylor 2-3, to me, they mostly did take advantage of those similar type opportunities, and they won, approximately half of those opportunities. I don't know if the committee is going to see it exactly that way or not, or if they'll just look and say, well, they both have two wins. Williams is a little bit better than Hardin Simmons, let's say. 8 points of strength of schedule. Maybe it goes back to Redlands. I can see that. I don't know. But for me, I would view the 2-7 not as a complete negative, but as a little bit of, hey, we had some opportunities we didn't take advantage of, and you haven't shown yourself to be completely on the level. So I think that's largely why we went with Mary Hardin Baylor. The other conversation was obviously, is it Whitworth or Whitman? But we still did note Whitworth has about 20 points, maybe not quite 20 points of strength of schedule advantage. They have a regionally ranked win over Elmhurst, which is a solid win, and they have, I think, a 2-0 head-to-head against Whitman. So we were thinking that Whitworth would stay ahead of Whitman, but that resume then would not be able to overcome probably the Redlands or the Mary Hardin Baylor resume.
And learning from last week, when we thought it would be Whitworth, it ended up being Redlands. And looking back at the data from last week, it didn't move in Whitworth's favor this
Right.
week.
Yeah.
So we felt like with the updated data, it would still be Redlands over Whitworth. And then noticing that, well, Redlands and Mary Hardin Baylor look very similar with the equal winning percentage, very similar strength of schedule. And so that's why it came down to those two for us. Now, Matt, going back to the 2-7 versus 2-3, this is where you get sometimes it's like, are we double counting criteria,
Yeah.
right? Because
Well, we always
a
are.
big
Yeah.
a big number in the RRO category, well, that's already taken into account in terms of strength of schedule, right? Because if you're playing a lot of
Yeah.
regionally ranked teams, probably you have a big strength of schedule. So this is where I can't see there being any sort of reward for the 2-7 over the 2-3, um, because that would be rewarding like a particular subset of scheduling.
Yeah.
When you look at Mary Hardin Baylor, they have the strength of schedule of 538, which is now not a great margin over 530, but it's more. So why would we reward the Redlands schedule when it has a lower SOS just because within that lower SOS, more teams happen
Yeah.
to be regionally ranked? Oh, by the way, not even teams that they necessarily
Yeah.
beat compared to Mary Hardin Baylor.
It makes you look like you built that SOS on games you just didn't win. Whereas Mary
Right.
Hardin Baylor built that SOS on games that they sometimes did win and sometimes lost.
Right. So we'll see. It'll be very interesting. I don't know that we have a whole lot of conviction, but as
No.
we work it out for ourselves in two very similar resumes that we think it's between the two. From what we learned last week, we think it would be between the two, and maybe it still is Redlands. But as we look into it and consider it, I think Mary Hardin Baylor and Matt, and I think it would be a real surprise to people to see Mary Hardin Baylor jump
Yeah.
into the regional rankings here. Just as it feels like, it's a team that we had certain expectations for coming into this season, and then they've just been completely off the radar. Well, here we are mid-February, and they may be on the cusp of entering the Region 10 regional rankings.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of the radar, though, let's talk bubble for this region. Mary Hardin Baylor might be entering the regional ranking picture, but they're not going to be on the national bubble picture. They're still a Pool A or bust.
Right.
We feel very good about Cal-Lu and Trinity, Texas. A chance for 2 Region 10 pods to be hosted at each of those locations, depending on what the Pool C picture is. St. Thomas and Pomona-Pitzer both look like kind of bubble teams right now. If both of those teams do get in, whether they win the Pool A in their conferences or they maybe get to that tournament final and have enough of a resume to get a Pool C selection, if you get Pool Cs from both those teams, I think we have enough to make a Southern California pod and a Texas pod. So I think St. Thomas and Pomona-Pitzer are very much in that tournament picture. Claremont Mudd Scripps to me right now looks more like bubble out. I think definitely they need to get to the championship game, and they might be having their eyes set on a Pool A bid for me. I don't think Hardin Simmons or Mary Hardin Baylor has a shot at a Pool C. So I think both of those teams are going to be needing to win the ASC with any other ASC team, because I think that's going to be a one bid league.
Excellent. There we go. I feel like there's more difficult decisions this week than last week, Matt.
Yeah, things got
We'll see what happens.
more jumbled up. And anyway, here's a review of our picks from last week. Zach, we had Mount Union -3 at Marietta. Marietta won that game big, 87-72. Zach, you got that pick. Game 2 was Trinity 3-point favorites at St. Thomas. St. Thomas won this game outright, and we both missed that. Worcester and Wabash were pick'ems at Wabash. Wabash won by 10. Zachary, you got that one. Pomona-Pitzer we thought was too big of a line at 6.5 at Cal-Lu. Cal-Lu won that game by 13. They look strong. You get that one. And our game of the week was Calvin at Shrine, MIAA title on the line. Calvin was 4-point underdogs by the computer, but they won in overtime by 7. We both got that pick. So recapping the week, Zach, you went 3-2, picked up an additional 2 games on me. I went 1-4. You are now 44-30-1. I am 40-34-1. I've got a lot of work to do in a little bit of time. All right, this week's pick slate. Game number 1 is Central, 6-point underdogs at Dubuque. These are, I think, all conference tournament games, by the way, besides the UAA one at the end. TCNJ, 8.5-point underdogs at Rowan. The computer likes Roanoke by 3 versus Washington and Lee at the Salem Civic Center. And then the computer finds Tufts as 8-point underdogs versus Trinity, Connecticut. And then our D3 Datacast game of the week with UAA championship implications. Carnegie Mellon 9-point computer line underdogs at Case Western Reserve. Zach, let's start at the top. Central and Dubuque. Picking against the 6-point computer line, who do you like?
Give me Dubuque. I'm not going to be scared off by the 6 points here, Matt. I think Dubuque is a slight tier ahead of Central, even though they've all been in that ARC mix all year.
I never know what to make when two American Rivers Conference teams play each other, but I know that I need to make up points on you. So I'm going to go the other direction and say Central can keep it close and maybe win it outright. Game number 2, TCNJ at Rowan. Zach, what do you think about this big line?
All right, I know I laid 6 in the last one, but Matt, here's my strategy for this week is I feel like conference tournament time, everything gets scrunched together. I'm going to be even more scared off by big numbers than I have in the past. Give me the College of New Jersey.
All right, you're going TCNJ, Zach. I'm going to go with you. I think 8.5 is too big. We've seen Rowan up, we've seen Rowan down. I think you're right that this is going to be a tight one. So I think 8.5 is just too big for me. Roanoke and Washington and Lee. We're going to that great ODAC tournament at the Salem Civic Center here.
Matt, I am going to go with Roanoke. I feel like we've been talking about for 2 years, but I feel like there's a distinct line in the games that Roanoke wins and the type of games Roanoke loses. This is much more of the type of game they win. Give me the Maroons, even laying the 3.
Do you remember Washington and Lee playing that triple overtime game last year in last year's ODAC tournament? That was awesome.
It was 4 overtime, wasn't it?
Quadruple overtime, maybe. It was so many overtimes. I didn't even remember. Roanoke. I thought similar to you, Zach. I think Roanoke needs some good wins. I think they're playing. I think they're playing really well right now, and I think they have can we somehow sneak into this tournament type feelings? I think that they're going to go in, and I think they're going to win this game against Washington and Lee, and I think they can cover that 3-point line as well. So I'm going to take Roanoke. And now we're going over to the NESCAC Toughs versus Bantams, Jumbos versus Bantams. 8-point line is huge. What do you like?
Well, having just 2 weeks ago gotten burned by the Tufts Trinity, the number is too big. I'm expecting a lower scoring game. Thought process before. I'm going to go back to that. Well, one of these times, I think I'll be right.
Okay, so you are taking Tufts. Okay, taking
Jumbos.
Big line.
Roll bows.
Yeah, I thought the same. I just can't pick the 8-point line twice. I think to me the NESCAC tournament is one of those anything can happen type tournaments. I know Trinity's the big favorite here, but I think I'm looking for Tufts. I think Tufts can hang strong. So we'll see. Keep it within 8. And then going out to the game of the week, travel partners Carnegie Mellon and Case. Who do you like?
I'm going to keep with the theme, Matt. 9 points is too big. Carnegie Mellon is playing well. Case is playing well too. And as you mentioned, there are championship implications for both teams. Yeah. Actually, Carnegie Mellon's still alive for a tri-championship with Case and NYU. Ultimately, I don't think we'll end up with tri-champions here, Matt, but I like Carnegie Mellon to keep it a single-digit game. Yeah,
as someone who has spent so many countless hours rooting against Carnegie Mellon, they just find a way to pull it out every single time and muck up the Regional 7 picture. So I'm sick of it this time. I'm going to join forces with Carnegie Mellon. I think they can keep this close. They seem like they're always in the game. 9 points is going to be too big. All I know about UAA is all these games are tight. So I think I'm going to go with Carnegie Mellon to keep it within 9. So not much separation for you and me, Zach. Only the one game.
Just trying to protect my lead. Taking the air out of the basketball, Matt.
All right.
Mailbag. All right, one mailbag item this week, Matt, comes from someone we know, Tom Snyder, our father. Did the D3 Datacast staff check off any Ultimate D3 bucket list items, episode 5, this season, or any new additions to the list? Now, Matt, I think Dad's asking us a little bit of a leading question here. I appreciate the plug for episode 5, one of the earliest episodes we ever did, creating a bucket list for Division III basketball fans. And I say it's a bit of a leading question because attending the Great Lakes Invitational was on that list, which we did, and Mom and Dad were there as well. So I think they already know that.
Yeah, we were the only media members in attendance that also brought their parents. So I think that was good to see. No, the Great Lakes Invitational was great. I had never watched personally in person 8 Division III basketball games within a 2-day span, but I think that was fun. It was just amazing how the day just kept rolling with great game after great game. We're excited to attend next year as well. It's going to be here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So excited to be D3 GLI attenders next season. I think that's the only one we added though this year. Is that right?
I did go back and look, and I think that is the case. But Matt, I thought of one new potential addition here,
Oh
and
yeah.
this is not necessarily for any Division three basketball fan, but maybe for our personal list is I found out that at Nebraska Wesleyan they play in the Snyder Arena. So I feel
Oh,
like as big Division
Lincoln.
three basketball fans, we should make a trip to Lincoln.
Okay.
Maybe I don't know what kind of signage they have there, but you know
Get a
to
picture.
get a picture taken under the Snyder Arena sign would be awesome.
With like 2 airline tickets, a night or two hotel, just to get a picture in front of Snyder Arena. That's probably worth it, right?
Probably,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, let's do it. So yeah, we
I've
got
never
to.
been I've never been to Lincoln, so
I've been to Lincoln.
bucket list all the way around.
I had to fly out of Lincoln from a work trip once, and it was fine. Yeah,
Good to
it
hear.
was fine.
Yeah, I like it.
I would
All right,
like
that
I would like to go to the D3Hoops.com Classic in Vegas. I would still at some time like to attend the ODAC tournament. I think those are two bucket list items I would like to do as far as events. So those are on my list for the future still.
yes, the bucket list still stands. If you have not checked out our ultimate bucket list for the Division three basketball fan, head back to episode 5. We'll link it in the show description. Check it out. Let us know what you think. And that wraps up the mailbag. Just the one item this week, Matt. If our dear listeners have anything they want to hear us talking about, they can send in a mailbag item by leaving a message on YouTube. Send it to us on any and all of that social media garbage. We'll find it and we will talk about it. Otherwise, you know what we do here, Matt. We just talk about whatever we want. This is a chance to make sure we're talking about what our listeners want. And speaking of our listeners, we have some great ones, including the list here, Matt. We have some fantastic people who have gone to patreon.com/D3Datacast and said, yeah, you know what? I want to support these guys even more than I already do by subscribing to their YouTube channel, hitting the thumbs up button, leaving comments, interacting with these bozos. I want to also financially support them. These people have done it. Head to patreon.com/D3Datacast. You can find out more information, how you can join the fun, and help make everything we do free and accessible to everyone in the Division three basketball community. Because that's what we're all about, Matthew.
Thank you to everyone on this list. Zachary, I had fun with this regional ranking episode once again. Great job, team.